victorious, victorialus. Erastus necessitas. Horarius despondeo. Spiritus obdomio. Patriarcha gladiator. Offictio Divinitas salutaris. Vertivas libertas.
Hello my brothers and sisters of the Order, welcome back to the Order. I'm Celtic Templar, and welcome back to another how-to video, this time covering none other than the ancient Hallstatt warrior. Now that's right y'all, we are actually finally going to be getting to the Hallstatt culture in general. Now maybe y'all don't know what the Hallstatt culture is. The Hallstatt culture was what you would call the beginning of the Celtic era in Europe. This is where the Celtic culture began. This is the Celtic culture pretty much from the Bronze Age period, from the 12th to the 5th century BC. And what we can understand about the Hallstatt culture in general with its warriors is that there were different variations on the historical points in history. What do I mean by this? No, kind of simple really. As you can tell with my equipment, I am a light foot soldier. Now yes, this video we're going to be covering the foot soldiers for right now until we get to our next video on the Hallstatt noblemen. So many of y'all are going to ask this question: Templar, what are the Hallstatt warriors? What was their equipment? What was their how much did they get paid? Well, that's the thing though. Their equipment and their weaponry varied from user to user, since one, they were Celtic warriors. And the fact is, on the style of the culture of the Celts, they did have variation on equipment. However, one equipment always stands out: their helmets and their armor. That's why I am wearing their armor. This is called Hallstatt soft armor, or as we today call Gambison. Here's the thing, it's not Gambison, it's Hallstatt soft armor. Now, this style of armor is incredibly light and effective, and it's always been said to be sleeveless. In fact, from pictorial evidence that we have discovered, in fact, this is mostly from pictorial evidence. We have still not recovered any archaeological finds on Hallstatt soft armor, since one, it would have been made out of fabric. But what we can tell from historical artwork and pictorial evidence and such, it actually shows that Hallstatt soft armor had variation in designs. It had beautiful artwork on it. It even had embroidered bronze buttons, as it was put. In other words, they probably put like rivets or something to show certain types of artwork all along the Hallstatt equipment. But it depends on their user. Other accounts actually state that also they had beautiful colorations from historical artwork we have seen and found from pottery. It shows that these tunics, or these forms of armor, had beautiful artwork of blue, red, and variation of colors. As well, they also had different variation in sizes, down from the knee to the thigh. So in other words, it depended on the user on how they wanted it. Although much of the Hallstatt cultural armor shows a front open area, so that way they could put it on, put the lace through, and pretty much that type of form. Now, their equipment also had variation of spears and such, and javelins, as there is much pictorial evidence showing them throwing their javelins and such. Other accounts also show on the shields. We have found variation of large round or oval shields like this, but with different variation in coloration. So in other words, view a different variation of colors on this. So yeah. But what I can actually guarantee about saying this is that one historian has actually discovered a variation of an oval style shield, almost buckler sized. In other words, small but yet very light. And this probably came from the time of the 12th century BC, so very early. As well, another variation of their weapons would also be this, the Hallstatt style axe. Now this style is of earlier productivity of weaponry and would later be seen throughout the cultures of other than the Hallstatt. Now, this style, the Hallstatt style of axe, had two forms of combat style warfare. The regular bladed size and the back blade side. Now before any idiots start saying, this is a two-headed axe head, it's not. This is actually of a impact style of a blade and the impact style of that of a mace. In other words, the one end right here is meant to go in through armor like this, like pretty much punch through like soft armor, or as well, limbs. While the back piece, this is meant for helmets, like helmets, other plates of armor, rather than that of breaking bone. But it could probably be used like that, seeing the fact that it's like that of a mace head. So in fact, this would have been the most common weapon that they would have used, but artwork depictions say otherwise, so that's saying something. So it was probably more of a ritualistic weapon rather than a combat weapon. As well, their swords. This is actually a really cool one. Let me get my other sword to prove my point. Their swords varied from user to user, and this is one of the earliest examples of a bronze-style sword, the antenna sword. Now this is a really cool one. Now this is a reproduction, and I kind of do like this one. And this is made out of full bronze style blade, so yeah. However, the earlier period of the Hallstatt culture was from this, and would later evolve to having steel blades like this. And it's weird enough, to say the least, that both of these style swords have the same blade length. The only difference was, this sword had a different variation in steel quality. The steel quality on the later periods was more meant of steely iron, as we have actually found Hallstatt style swords that were bent and as well folded up into circular type forms and sacrificed to the river gods or the gods of the lakes. So yeah, well, so now the hilts would have changed depending on the user. There was actually a sword known as the Gunlingen sword, and this would be also known as the Hallstatt style sword. And these were, instead of like a tip like sword like this, it would have had, well, more of like that meant for cutting use. In other words, like that of cavalry style. And most historians believe that's actually what it would probably have been meant for. It even has the Mexican style pommel, which would also be known as the Hallstatt pommel, seeing the fact that it was mostly found in this area of Europe. So yeah. As well, other variation of weapons also were their short swords. They could have also had different variation in sizes. Now, these would have probably been knives, but if I was a lower class warrior, this would be as much steel or bronze I could probably afford, while the rest would be normal. So, in other words, this would be a normal style sword. I could easily use it for combat use, and over the years, I could have it evolve to something like this. So, it depended on the user. Now, another style of armor is this, the Hallstatt bell helm. Now maybe I'll say, oh Tippler, you're wearing a kettle hat. No, I'm not wearing a kettle hat. This is different from a kettle helmet. What's the difference? Well, kind of obvious. This style of helmet was actually first discovered in the Hallstatt culture. And when we take a look at this thing, it does look like a kettle helm, yes, but it's known as the Hallstatt bell helm. These style of helmet had horsehair protruding from the side. They also were stated to have had not just horsehair, but as well even that of beautiful feathers sticking out from the sides and such. But I can go on and on of what it could have looked like, but we don't have much pictorial evidence, nor do we have much archaeological evidence, to say the least. But there were different variation in designs. Some of these actually had a wide protrusion upward, and some didn't, so it depended on the user. As well, the Hallstatt bell helm also had this ridge here. This ridge was meant to hold the horse plumes in their type of form. In other words, it was like a casted form to pretty much, well, seal it in place. Since it's a reproduction, it doesn't do that, so sadly, yeah. Now this style of helmet I do like, other than, I kind of like this one style of helmet a lot more than other Bronze Age helmets. Reason being, it just feels right in the head. It just feels perfect. But I kind of like this. Anyways, why don't we get right into the video, shall we? like that little bit of a rundown. Now, as y'all saw in this video, this armor and equipment that feels incredibly light. I feel no fatigue, and I can see why the Celtic Culture kept the infamous Hallstatt soft armor for the past few centuries after. And because for the next few centuries, the Hallstatt soft armor would still be used up until like the 1st century BC. And our accounts also indicate maybe by the 3rd century BC, but we don't have much recorded information. All we do know is that by the time after the Hallstatt Culture, it's said that by written accounts by both Latins, Etruscan, Romana, and as well Greeks, stating that warriors from the far north wore quilted armor, that of which no blade could strike through. This sounds like Hallstatt soft armor. Now, I myself have never understood or never heard about the Hallstatt Culture. When I was young, I never even knew about this until I actually came across one of my father's old books. And it was actually known as the Ancient Celts. And this one I actually like because it had the artwork from Angus, my bride, who actually did a lot of the artwork in there, and he did perfectly on the Hallstatt cultural regions. Now, one thing I do want to add, though, is that, one, the infamous Hallstatt bell helm would slowly disappear from history. In fact, it would slowly be phased out from this design to a more later design, as we know from Celtic cultural sources, as it would later protrude in its type of form to stick out from afar and to avoid certain blows from, well, downward chops. This helmet, all in all, is extremely protective, especially from the hot sun, but the problem is, as soon as, say, for example, I was fighting on the battlefield and such, and someone came down with a downward strike, this will automatically make my head follow with it, so rendering it almost impossible to use. And I want to put this out here, though. I hear maybe you already saying, well, you didn't have certain equipment the cultural Celts would have had. Well, here's the thing. It's not that easy trying to find historical weapons they would have used at the time. In fact, Hallstatt Gundingen swords, very few people make them, and for very, very reasonable prices. So, sadly, yeah. Now, I hear maybe you already asking this one, though. Well, when are you going to get on the Celtic noblemen of the Hallstatt culture? Well, hopefully soon in our next how-to video. One, covering this subject in history is very time-consuming. Luckily, though, I do have the equipment for the video, so, yeah. Now, much of our historical understanding about the Hallstatt culture in general changes, and we do end up getting different variations on the historical periods. As well, many of y'all do. Now, one account I have actually read about the Hallstatt culture actually does come from a written account from historians and Latins. Now, if any of y'all know who the Latins were a type of group in Italy before later being conquered by the Romana. And it is stated that the Hallstatt wealth in history, in fact, the Celts of the Hallstatt culture were extremely rich for one reason and one reason only: salt. Now, before anyone starts saying, Templar, salt makes you rich. Well, back in antiquity, yes. In fact, it's actually where we get our modern day word for salary from the Romans, who of which also got paid with salt. In fact, salt was the refrigerator of its era, and as well, it was the major spice of its era. That's right, salt was the major spice of history. In fact, the Hallstatt Salt Road was stated to be, or the Salt Trade Road of the Hallstatt culture, was stated to go probably as far as, well, all the way to Anatolia, or even further. Seeing the fact that, one, there are even accounts from, well, Bronze Age period cultures like that of the Emirates, and as well the Sideriti, who of which actually write, and even that of the Egyptians, that even state, and I quote, on the historical text of these tall Northmen of the far north that came to them with such ragged beards. It is said that they wore beautiful bronze jewelry that stuck out from afar. As well, later periods even spoke about neck rings that they wore around their necks. There's even one account that actually states from a Carthaginian during the early periods that even states on how these people stood so tall that they could probably cling to the heavens. Now, we don't know if this actually means that one, these guys were big as hell, or that they were trying to impress them in some form. Because one, these, according to one archaeological find, these guys actually were about somewhere like the tallest one that was discovered was about somewhere between 5'9" and 5'11". Look, think of how huge that guy would have been compared to someone smaller stature. These guys were tall. So, yeah. Now I'm about 6 feet, so just think of how small they would have been to me. They would have been about, the tallest probably be about that big, maybe, then probably about that big. So still, pretty tall compared to the average Roman height at the time. Yeah, this would have been a Roman height at the time, or as well Etruscan height, compared to the Hallstatt culture, which were giants. It's also said that Hallstatt footwear, like what I'm wearing right here, had different variation in sources. There are even accounts that even states that the Hallstatt footwear, that the footwear that the people of the far north wore, were clung to their leg as though it wrapped around it. In other words, it would have been extremely long. Some accounts even state all the way up to their knee. Now, there has actually only been one archaeological find like this, and it was actually from that of a nobleman's tomb. So in other words, only probably the most wealthiest could actually have, well, elongated footwear that goes up to their knee. So, yeah. But I'd like to hear y'all's thoughts on the Hallstatt culture. What do you think about it? Its equipment and weaponry. Anyways, guys, this has been Celtic Templar. Hope to see y'all in the next one. And if y'all have any warriors from history y'all want me to talk about, let me know down in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to talk about them. And as well, get right into videos about them. Anyways, guys, it's been Celtic Templar. Hope to see y'all in the next one.